Okay, so let's just talk quickly about the calendar and what I kind of have planned here. So we're right here on the 17th. Now next week we're not going to have class, okay, because that's Thanksgiving break. Then we'll come back, and it looks like we'll come back then on December 1st. Okay, and then we have December 8th is a normal class period. And then we've got the 15th, which is our final exam. So I don't know that we'll have an exam over chapter 3. I think I'll put that in our final. So our final is going to cover chapters 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a few other little pieces that we'll talk about. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at 3-6. And next week, remember that's break. We'll come back from break. We're going to finish up chapter 3, and we're going to start reviewing for our final. So next class period on the 1st, when we come back, I'll give you the practice final to work out. Okay? And how I do things is you'll get a practice final, you'll get a take-home final, and you'll get an in-class final. Now, why I give you the take-home final is it's basically the same as the practice final, different numbers in a different order. You use the practice final to do the take-home final. And then when you come to class to take your final, you've already seen those questions already twice before. Once on the practice final, once on the take-home final, just with different numbers. You'll come in, you'll take your final exam, so you're going to know exactly what's going to be on. We're going to spend a lot of time reviewing for it. Your final is worth a lot of points, but students do the best on the final versus any other exam almost every single time. So you're going to know exactly what's going to be on there. You're going to have a take-home final. That's going to basically be your homework with the practice final. But we're going to work out the practice final. So you're going to know how we got to all the solutions. You use that to do your take-home final. And then when you come to class on December, 15th, I believe. Yep, December 15th. When you come to class, we'll take our final exam. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So next week we won't have class. When we come back, we'll be reviewing and finishing up chapter 3. And then we'll spend December 8th, another class period, of nothing but basically reviewing and answering questions you might have over chapter 3. And then our final is going to be right here on December 15th. Okay, so not that many class periods left. Let's now go ahead and try to complete another section in chapter 3. So we're not going to have a test, so you can cross out that practice exam, because we're not going to do that. Sometimes I have time to do a test over chapter 3. Sometimes I don't. I just feel like it would be too much to try to cram in a test and then a final right after that. So we won't have that test, but everything will be in your final. So you'll see all these type of questions in your final. And so now we're going to move on, and we're going to look at 3.6, which 3.6 is actually going to be an easier section. And I think you'll find 3.6 to be a little bit easier than 3.5. 3.4 and 3.5 are the hardest because there's so much algebra. In 3.6, we're going to be graphing and we're going to be looking at inequalities. And so we're going to be graphing these in 2 dimensions, so on a Cartesian plane, and we're going to be shading. Now, when we look at these inequalities, we need to remember that greater than or less than, those are going to be represented with a dotted line when we graph them. Greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, those are going to be represented with a solid line. Now we are going to have to shade, and so how we shade is we pick a point and we check that point, and that's going to tell us which half of the graph to shade on. It's actually very easy. So let's start with this one, and let's try to graph this equation here, or sorry, inequality here. How about we have y is less than 3x plus 5. So first thing we want to do is this is our original. This is what we're going to be checking in. So this is what we're going to start with. So I like to put a box around it so we don't lose it. because we're going to have to, we're going to be coming back and checking in this equation, this inequality. So we're going to replace this with an equal sign so that we can graph it. And if I want to graph this line, since it's y equals, our slope is 3. Right? And that 5, well, that represents the y-intercept. And that is 0, 5. So we highlighted or boxed the original so we wouldn't lose it. We just replaced our inequality with an equal sign so we can graph it. Now, when we go to graph it, we're going to be using a dotted line. Why? Because here's our original. We don't have a bar underneath because it's strictly less than. So we're going to be using a dotted line. So we'll find our y-intercept at 0, 5. Right here. And then what are we going to do from that 0, 5? Well, from that 0, 5, our slope is 3 over 1. So we'll be going up 3 and over 1 unit. So from our point here, we're going to go up 1, 2, 3. Okay, so up 3 and over about 1 unit. Make our new dot. And we're going to connect these together. Now, when we connect them together, we are going to be using a dotted line. Why? Because our original is a strictly less than or strictly greater than. So we're going to be using a dotted line here. Very, very important that you notice it's a dotted line. Okay, so there it is. So there's our graph. Now we do need to figure out where to shade. And so we pick a point that is not on that line. And the easiest point to pick is going to be 0, 0. And we'll find our 0, 0. So 0, 0 is right here. And we check that 0, 0 to see if it's true or if it's false. So now we're going to check 0, 0. And we're going to plug it in. And we're going to see what happens here. So we're going to check 0, 0. And in our original inequality, so we'll check it in right up here. And that's going to be 0 less than 3 times 0 plus 5. And we're trying to see if this is true or if this is false. Well, the right-hand side comes out to be 5. Left-hand side is 0. Okay, so is 5 bigger than 0? Is that true or is that false? Is 5 bigger than 0? Yes, 5 is bigger than 0, so this would then be true. Now, the line is going to divide it in half. So this line divides it. Our 0, 0 was the true half, so that means the upper side is the false half. So that line divides it. 0, 0 was true. Now we shade where it's true. So where is it true? It's true below the line. And so there's what our graph looks like. It's a dotted line shaded below. And once you get the hang of these are very, very simple compared to the last section. Let's try another one. This one I'm going to just give you a y line. So let's try and graph this one. Okay, this is our original inequality. So I like to box it so we don't lose it. That way we don't forget what we're working with. So this is our original before we changed it. I'm going to replace that with an equals, and that's going to be the same thing as y equals 3. Now, this one's going to have a solid line. Why? because greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, those get a solid line. Now let's take a moment to remember how we graph the line y equals 3. If we're looking at the line y equals 3, it's not diagonal, right? All it is a horizontal line. So here's your y-axis. We find 3. It's going to be a horizontal line, 3, 3. Now we're going to use a solid line because it's less than or equal to. So we're going to be using a solid line. So there's that piece. Now, because it's an inequality, we still have to shade it. So we're going to check, again, 0, 0. And we're going to check that back in the original. All we have is the y part. We're just going to plug that 0, 0 in. So 0 is less than or equal to, well, let's make that positive 3. My mistake there. Sorry about that. Yep, I graphed it wrong. So let's make that a positive 3 there. Sorry about that. So 0 is less than or equal to 3. Okay. Now look at the way it's opening. It's opening towards the 3. Is 3 bigger than 0 again? Is 3 bigger than 0? Yes, 3 is bigger than 0. So that would make that then true. So that means then 0, 0 is below the green line. So that's true. And that's false. And where do we shade? We shade the true region, which is the region below. So all of this is going to get shaded. And make sure you notice that's a positive 3 there, because it was negative before, but I think I forgot to write it down wrong. So just make sure it's positive 3 there. What about an X line? How's an X line going to work? Well, an X line is going to work the same way, right? Except instead of it being a horizontal line, it's going to be a vertical line. So let's try and graph one of these. Let's try and graph x is greater than 5. So strictly greater than 5. Less than or greater than, those get, again, a solid, dotted line, right? So no bar in the bottom of the inequality symbol. It means we get a dotted line. Now we replace that inequality with an equal sign. And how would we graph x equals 5? Well, we graph x equals 5 by finding out where x is 5. X-axis is, remember, left and right component. So we want the 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's your 5. This is now going to be a vertical line, and it's going to have a dotted line. Now we need to check again. 0, 0. Always use 0, 0 unless the line goes through it. And in a moment, we'll look at one where it goes through it. So we're going to check again, back in the original. 0, 0. And so is 0 larger than 5? Is that true or is that false? In this case, it's false. Now, what does it look like? This dotted line here separates it into a left and a right half. 0, 0 is here. 0, 0 was false. So that means this half is false. The other side is true. And so where do we shade? The true side. And so in this case, we'll be shading over here on the right. So these are going to be, I think, a lot easier for most students. It's not near as much calculations. It's just remembering the steps and checking the point. try another. Let's try this one. So this is what we're going to be graphing. I always, again, like to put a box around it so we don't lose it, because it's easy to misplace that inequality. And so I put a box around it so that I can keep track of it. Now we need to go ahead and replace that with an equals. And we need to get it to where we can work with it. So we're going to move that 5 over. We have to solve it for y. So move that 5x over. And now we've got 3y equals a minus 5x. Divide by our 3. And we've got y equals now minus 5/3 x. Okay. So we want to graph this. What's my slope? Well, the slope, again, is the number in front of the x, right? And so my slope would be minus 5/3. Our y-intercept is the number on the end. Well, we don't have a number on the end, so therefore, we're going to start at 0, 0. So our y-intercept is going to go through the origin at 0, 0. So we're going to start at 0, 0, which is right here. And that's where we start at. And then what's my slope? Minus 5/3. So that means we go down 5, and we go over 3. So down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And over 3. Make my new dot. And we connect them together. And in this case, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, they get a solid line. So we're going to connect these together with our solid line right here. But we cannot check the 0, 0. Why can't we check the 0, 0? Well, we can't check 0, 0 because it goes through 0, 0. Okay? So we need another point. And we can use any point that we want. Let's pick one that's easy to work with. So we're now going to check. And I'm just going to pick a point that's easy to see. How about 1, 1? 1, 1 is right there. All right? So that's going to be an easy to check point. So we're going to now check that 1, 1. And we're going to check that back in the original. And that's going to be 5 times 1 plus 3 times 1 is less than or equal to 0. And the left-hand side, let's see what that would be. That would be 5 plus 3, which makes it 8. And is 8 smaller than 0? Is that true or is that false? Be false, okay. And where was the 1, 1 at? 1, 1 is on this side, so this side is false. This side is true down below. Where do we shade? True part, so we shade right there. Okay. Now let's just look at a couple of questions from the homework. Okay, there's lots of them. There's lots of different ones, and I'll try to do one of each type so you kind of understand how these work. So let's just look at question 3. So there's lots of these, so I'm just going to do one of them. Now, a lot of these, they already graph it for you. Okay, so like on this one, if you look at 3 from your homework, this has already been graphed. But what we need to do is we need to figure out where to shade. So here's your original inequality, and we need to figure out where to shade. So the graph has already been drawn, so the hard part's been done. So all we need to do is figure out, do we shade above or do we shade below? Well, we can't pick 0, 0, because 0, 0 is right here, and the line goes through. So let's pick another point. And I don't care what point you pick. You just pick one that's easy to work with. So I'm going to pick 0, 5. Now you can use any point that you want. Make sure, though, that it's not on that dotted line. You could have picked 1, 1. 1, 1 would be right there. I think it's going to be easier, though, if we just do 0, 5. You can use any point you want. It does not matter. So just make sure you know where it's at. So we're going to use, and we're going to check 0, 5. And remember, the 0 is your x, the 5 is the y part. And let's see what we've got here. Plug in your x value, plug in your y value, and 3 times 5 is 15. And is 0 larger than 15? Nope, that is clearly now false. So that means this half is false, the lower half is true, and where do we shade? We shade the true part, and in this case, we're going to be shading the lower half. So we would be shading that. So in this question, and there's a couple of them like this, they already have the line. All you have to do is shade it, either above or below it. Now, some of them you're going to have to graph it completely, and we've done several of those. But like on this one, it's already done. Okay, question 4. There's a couple like question 4 where you got a graph and you need to figure out which equation it came from. Look at our equations and look at our graph. Okay, the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the slope of this line. So when we look at this line, what is it doing? It's going up. So if it's going up, it has to have a positive slope. So it goes up from left to right. And if it goes up from left to right, that means your slope, m, is positive. Now, which ones can we eliminate? If your slope has to be positive, then we can eliminate A and B, right? Okay. Why can we eliminate A and B? Right, because these both have negative slopes. So look at the slope first. You can eliminate. Now, what about the y-intercept? Well, the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So that's going to be at about 0, 2. These are okay because these have a y-intercept of 2. So that matches with that. So these are both okay. Now we need to figure out which one is correct. And it's going to be based upon the shading. So we've got it down to 2 choices. And we're going to have to pick and we're going to have to see which one it is. If I pick 0, 0, because 0, 0 is right here. And 0, 0 in this case from our picture is true, right? So if I plug in 0, 0, it should be what? It should be true, because that's what our picture says. One of these we're going to plug it in and it'll be true, and one of them will plug it in and it'll be false. 0, 0 is in the shaded part, so whichever one is false is wrong. We need the one that's true. So let's check 0, 0 in C and D. If I check 0, 0, we end up with 0 is less than or equal to 2, and that's true. What about D? If I check it in D, it should be false. Okay, if I check 0, 0 into D, we get 0 is bigger than 2, and that's false. Now, what did we want? 0, 0 from our picture is in the true part, in the shaded part. So we want it to be true. So the one that's correct for question number 4 is going to be what? is going to be C, right? Because it's true in the shaded part. We know our slope is positive from left to right because the 2 is positive. These are gone because they have negative slopes. So several of those. Now let's look at a couple of these. We have to fill in the blank here. So it says, after reading the sentence, correctly fill in the blank with the appropriate inequality symbols. The speed limit on a section, and this is question 9, on a section of Interstate 80 is 70 miles an hour. The legal speed limit on this section of Interstate 70 is blank, 70 miles per hour. Well, what do we know? Okay, the speed limit on this is 70. So we can't go over 70, right? So the legal speed on this interstate is going to be what? Less than or equal to 70. Right? Because we don't want to exceed that speed limit. So the legal speed limit is going to be less than or equal to 70. So I filled it in with less than or equal to. Let's do one more just to make sure. Question 11. To be eligible to vote, one must be at least 18 years of age. So voters must be blank 18 years of age. Well, if you want to fill this in, what do we know? They can be 18 to vote, right? Have to be either 18 or more. So in this case, it's going to be greater than or equal to, and it's going to be going in that direction because the voters need to be greater than or equal to 18. And there's several questions like that, like 13 is a golf course budget where you fill it in without inequality. Okay. We'll go ahead and work out 12 as well. There's lots of questions, and they're all pretty much the same, so there's going to be several of them for you to work through, but I'm going to go ahead and look at 12 as well. So I think there's another one like 12 later on in the homework also. Well, let's look at 12. So in order to make a profit, an automobile dealership must sell at least 200 vehicles. The dealership plans to sell X units of one model and Y units of another. And it can be modeled by this inequality. Graph this inequality. So this is our inequality. So we have X plus Y is greater than or equal to 200. So that's what we're going to be working with. Now, what do we need to do? We need to graph it. So we're going to go ahead and take this, and we're going to replace it with an equals. We'll move the X over. And we now have Y equals a negative X plus 200. Is everyone okay with that so far? Now, how do I graph it? Well, what's my slope? My slope is a negative 1. And what's my y-intercept? 0, 200, right? Okay. So where's 0, 200 at? That's up here. What's my slope? Minus 1 over 1. So that means we're going to go down 1. Sorry about that. Over here. We're going to go down 1, and we're going to go over 1. Now, we don't have to just go down 1 unit. We can go down 50 units and over 50, as long as they're the same. Whatever we go down, we have to go over the same because it's 1-to-1 ratio. So it's negative, so we know we're going to go down. So let's make it easier to see, and let's go down 50 units. So we're going to go down 50 units to 150, and then if we go down 50, we also have to go over 50. Okay, so that looks like it's going to go right about here. That's going to be over 50. We make our dot. And now we can connect them together. And this is going to be our graph. Now we are going to use a what? A solid line, right? Because you're inequality, solid line. So go ahead and connect these together. And we'll stop there. Now we need to figure out where to shade. Well, where are we going to check? Can we check 0, 0? Yes, 0, 0 is right there. You can use any point that you want. 0, 0 is not on the green line. So check 0, 0 in the original. And that's 0 plus 0 is greater than or equal to 200. And is 0 bigger than 200? Nope. So that is false. So that means this half is false. The above half is true. And where do we shade? The true part. That's what your graph will look like. And there's another one that's similar to it later on in your homework. Let's do one more just of the short answer questions, just so you see how these are working. And there's a couple of these too. Question 10. You can use words to describe it. You can use symbols to describe it. In an inequality, how do you determine which side of the boundary line to shade? What do you do? If you want to determine which one to shade, what do? You pick a point. And see if it's true or false. And shade the true side. Right? So that's how we do it. And there are several questions like this. How do you determine, in this case, which side of the boundary line to shade? Well, what you do is, remember we've done this. You pick a point. Usually we pick 0, 0. And you see if that point is true or if that's false. Okay? If it's true, we shade that part. If it's false, we shade the other side. But there's other questions that might say, is this one going to be a dotted line or solid line, and explain it? Other ones might say, can you use 0, 0? One of those questions says, can you use 0, 0? Well, it depends upon if it can or not. If it's got a 0, it doesn't work. And so we've talked about those. I think we did all the different types. Remember, next week is going to be our fall break. So for next week, your homework is going to be your homework for next week is going to be 3.5. You should be able to finish that. And 3.6. You should be able to do all of it. And next week, what we're going to do is we're going to finish up Chapter 3. We're not going to have an exam over Chapter 3 because it's going to be included in our final. There's not that much left in Chapter 3. We just have 3.7. So that's going to be it. So next week we'll come in, we'll finish up 3.7, and then we'll start reviewing for our final. And we're going to spend a lot of time going over the final. I want to make sure everyone does very, very well on the final. So this will be your last homework packet as well. If you haven't picked up your graded homework yet, I've got everything graded. And I'll pass these back before you read it. So I think a couple of you haven't yet. Okay, so let's see. And your overall grades in Canvas. Karen? And your overall grades in Canvas, you can look that up and see where you stand. I think almost everyone in here is doing fine, so no one needs to worry about things. Just keep up the good work. And I will see everyone then not next week, the week after. And if you ever want to check your grades, you can always look in Canvas. And I always put the notes on there as well. Okay. All right.
Have a good Thanksgiving.
Hey, you too. Yep. See everyone in the car.